I don't think it's possible. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to do. To change the Constitution, I don't think that would be accomplished.
I think doing away with the Second Amendment would clearly increase violence. To the extent that you disarm law-abiding citizens, you make it easier for criminals to go and commit crime.
Getting rid of the Second Amendment, all of these protesters, all of the people taking to the streets said that was not the main purpose, but yet it has come up because former Supreme Court Justice the former Supreme Court Justice Stevens, John Paul Stevens, writing in an op-ed in the New York Times, in 2008, the Supreme Court overturned Chief Justice Burger's and others' long-settled understanding of the Second Amendment's limited reach by the ruling in District Columbia versus Heller that there was an individual right to bear arms. That decision, which I remain convinced was wrong and certainly was debatable, has provided the NRA with a propaganda weapon of immense power. Overturning that decision via constitutional amendment to get rid of the Second Amendment would be simple and would do more to weaken the NRA's ability to stymie legislative debate and to block constructive gun control legislation than any other available option. Well, what about all of that? Let's bring in our panel. Former CIA analyst and nationally syndicated radio host Buck Sexton, Catherine Lucy, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Kimberly Strassel, a member of the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal. Kimberly, when I saw this, I said, wait, is this real? And sure enough, that op-ed did show up in the New York Times.
Yeah, it's crazy. I think Justice Stevens got a little too used to only having to get 5 votes on the Supreme Court. Obviously, repealing an amendment and repealing one that is as beloved in many states of this union as this one would require supermajorities of the states to sign on. It's an impossible task. And for that matter, even getting some of the proposals that have been put forward by these groups that want gun control, they're nowhere near it, as Dianne Feinstein has intimated in the Senate. Last time they tried to do this, they would have been lucky to have got 40 votes. So in that way, not much has changed politically in Washington.
So, Catherine, does this hurt somehow the effort that we just saw over the past few days, that now this left liberal justice, who, by the way, was appointed and nominated by a Republican, is suggesting get rid of the Second Amendment?
Well, I think what we need to note is that none of the we haven't heard from the organizers of the march or the some of the leaders on this issue really backing this idea. I looked a little bit on Twitter to see who was getting on board, and one of the students who is a key member of the march organizers, he tweeted today that this wasn't something that he was looking for. So it's clear that there are people trying to put some distance between themselves and this statement. But that said, it does play into this argument that you'll hear from gun owners and the National Rifle Association, this anxiety that the real agenda from some of these gun control advocates is to really try and repeal the Second Amendment.
Yeah, Buck?
Well, I have to say that there's a continued anxiety about it because we keep seeing instances like this with very prominent voices from the left or from the Democrat Party who say what we all think they actually believe, which is that they would like there to be, if not an outright ban, something very close to a ban on firearms in private hands of all kind. Quite honestly, it's also the only intellectually consistent argument. We often hear about incremental changes. People will talk about common sense gun reforms, and then there won't be a consensus on what those reforms would be. Brett, well, if they're so obvious and so common sense, one would think that they could all get on the same sheet of music. I walked through one of these protest marches in New York over the weekend, and there were signs about banning AR-15s. There was a sign that I saw that said Trump kills kids. So the rhetoric is clearly way out of line and overheated. And I would just also note that in that New York Times editorial from a former Supreme Court justice, they misidentified the picture of a weapon at the very top of the editorial as a rifle when it was in fact a musket, which for those of us who watch this debate closely is not surprising from the New York Times.
Yeah, here's some of the sound of the president and bringing up the Second Amendment as we've heard over recent weeks.
They'll take away your Second Amendment.
We are not trying to take everybody's guns away, and the NRA wants people to think that. They're fear-mongers.
There's nobody that loves the Second Amendment more than I do.
I think all of these young people, these leaders, are making very clear is it's a false choice to suggest you are either in favor of the Second Amendment or you want to take everyone's guns away.
So, Kimberly, is there a way to get this debate to a place where something actually happens in Congress?
In the short term, no. And I think that that's the important thing for everyone to understand. In Congress, despite everyone talking about how these marchers signal some new front and some new change in the politics, the reality is in Washington, this is probably the most pro-Second Amendment Republican Congress potentially in history. Nobody's going down the road of assault weapons bans. They just passed the Fix NICS bill as part of the omnibus, which does shore up some things in our background system. Many of them feel confident that that does provide them a way of saying that they're doing something about this issue, but they're not going to take up any legislation on this. The question is whether or not this plays some way in the midterms in the fall, whether or not it potentially hurts Senate Democrats who are up for re-election in Trump states, or whether it potentially hurts Republicans who are in suburban districts where there may be a lot of women voters or others who are watching this and they're not as committed to Second Amendment issues. We just won't know that until November comes along.
How many times, Catherine, do you think we'll hear, do you agree with Justice John Paul Stevens?
I'm sure that's going to be a talking point going forward, absolutely. But yes, I think to Kimberly's point, in the short term, we're not likely to see any sweeping change. The omnibus had some incremental changes, and there's really no momentum right now for any kind of big, major gun bill.